Good morning. I'm filming here today at Pegasus Art in one of our painting studios, which seems very appropriate to talk to you today about Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Here he is. Born in 1868 in Glasgow, Charles Rennie Mackintosh trained as an architect, but he was also a designer and an artist. Like many of the polymaths that has gone before him, he wasn't satisfied solely with painting. Creativity was to be a thread that ran throughout his life in every aspect. So growing up in Glasgow, it was an important trading port, exposed to foreign influences and a huge wave of industrialisation that had swept across the country at that time. It was undergoing a massive period of change, and Glasgow, of course, was a port and becoming a progressive Scottish town. So it was, in fact, a very exciting place for him to grow up, and Charles Rennie Mackintosh very much felt part of that wave. Incredibly, bizarrely perhaps, the connection between the progressive Scottish town and exotic Japan was in keeping with the 19th century spirit of adventure, as Glasgow was importing all sorts of goods from all over the world. Japonism was very much a feature of this time, and all sorts of luxury goods were coming into, being delivered into Glasgow port, including beautiful furniture, ceramics, and textiles. As Japan had abandoned its isolationist regime and took centre stage for the first time, it had been able to open itself up to other cultures, and it had sparked international interest. Hugely interesting to artists all over Europe. You may know that Matisse was particularly invested in Japanese style and had amassed an important collection of Japanese woodblock prints, which highly influenced his own work. Van Gogh also, and Charles Rennie Mackintosh here in Glasgow. This trend extended beyond the visual arts to architecture, gardening, clothing, and even theatre. The ukiyo-e prints, as I mentioned, the woodblock prints with the very heavy black lining, were very influential on artists all over Europe. So yes, Japonism, the Europeans couldn't get enough of it. At least every grand house in the country had one room decorated in chinoiserie, hand-painted wallpaper panels, screens, furnitures, and ceramics. So it's really fascinating that this link is made with Charles Rennie Mackintosh, whose architecture and interior design were highly influenced by this trend. He was, in fact, a front runner for utilitarianism of modernism, strongly influenced by Art Nouveau ideals and those of centuries of Japanese craft and form. He was a collector of Japanese architectural books and prints, and admired their culture for its simplicity, restraint, and economy, rather than the Western obsession with ostentatious accumulation. So that extended to his very understated Oriental interiors, were mixed with sort of Art Deco, Art Nouveau style. It is an ideal that Mackintosh tried to emulate. Modernism for Rennie Mackintosh was derived from rising enthusiasm of innovative ideas and new technology, and was looking to the future. So again, very progressive in its outlook, as was Glasgow itself, rather than towards a past and a history of tradition. Mackintosh was concerned with all aspects of functionality and beauty. As with his contemporary Frank Lloyd Wright, His architectural designs included specifications for the detailing and decoration and furnishing. So as mentioned, he was a painter, also an architect, but an interior designer. He designed the furniture. He had an influence on every aspect of his interiors. So rather like his predecessors, he was a polymath. He was the kind of William Morris of Glasgow in a very different way, but there are similarities to be, parallels to be struck. But Rennie Mackintosh was a watercolourist. Later in life, he moved to, in 1923, he moved to Couloir in the south of France on the Spanish border with his wife. His architectural commissions were drying up. Money was of short supply. He'd become disillusioned with architecture, and he decided to work as a watercolourist, painting landscapes and flower studies. And I have some examples here. I'm sorry, just to say that his wife was Margaret Mary MacDonald, and her sister was Frances MacDonald, and her husband Herbert McNair. They had all met at evening class in Glasgow School of Art, so they were all artists and were to become known as the Four. Rennie Mackintosh had joined forces with 3 other artists, and between them they actually exhibited all over Europe, Glasgow, London, Vienna and Austria. That made up the bulk of his early career, designing architecture, furniture, interiors, and exhibiting as the Four. But yes, he'd moved to the south of France on the Spanish border with Margaret in 1923 to try and live and work as a watercolourist. He had survived the First World War and accusations of working as a German spy, and his subsequent arrest, he had been fully exonerated, but nevertheless became very disillusioned with the United Kingdom and his work as an architect, and wanted to move to warmer climes. It was exactly what was needed, it seems. So I just wanted to show you some of his watercolours. This one is called La Rue du Soleil, and it's from Port de Vendres, and it's painted in 1926. So sorry for the glare. So we note that Rennie Mackintosh's watercolours often had a cool palette. Most beautiful watercolours, aren't they? Very, very detailed, very fine, very stylised. So yes, often painting with a cool palette. As a watercolourist myself, I'm very interested in this work that wasn't really recognised in its time, but now sell for 6 figures. Here's another one which I particularly like, with the complementary colours there of that sort of rust colour with the purple, beautiful purple shadows, and the dynamic sort of lines and landscapes beyond. That's called A Southern Town and was painted in 1924, also in the south of France. Yes, so Rennie Mackintosh, just to tell you about some of the techniques that he used in his watercolours. He used many transparent watercolours using lots of thin layers of washes. He was very strong on pencil outlines. That's because of his architectural and design work. Many of his landscapes feature architectural buildings and so on with pencil outlines that were overpainted but often visible. And he was a great one for pigment lifting, which is a technique used to create highlights in his paintings and reduce the tint strength. It's a technique that watercolorists use, but Rennie Mackintosh, it feature in many of his works. Also to mention that lots of his work was annotated, as with some, his architectural drawings and so on. He made notes and left perspective and measurement lines. He often signed his drawings with CRM, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, and MMM for Mary MacDonald Mackintosh. This one is called A Southern Port. Another beautiful watercolour, very, very accomplished. And this one I particularly like, which uses a vibrant green along with his typical cool palette, some architectural features and dynamic lines. And that is called Monte Alba and was painted in 1924 to 27. So sorry for the glare. It's the most beautiful watercolour, isn't it? I love his cool palette. And here is one of his lovely wildflower studies, of which he had many sketchbooks full from the south of France, northern Spain. These have very much a kind of deco feel to them, and a sort of sketchy but also beautiful and botanical. You can see the annotations he's made here. There's his mark at the bottom. And some annotations there at the top in his wildflowers. Beautiful. So those are they're called Sea Pink, and they're from the Holy Island in 1901. So, yeah. He was known for his meticulousness. He was influenced by Aubrey Beardsley, Gustav Klimt, the MacDonald sisters, as we've mentioned, and the mineral landscapes of Port Vendre. As we're at Pegasus Art, I just wanted to show you, this is a lovely little travel set. It's by Winsor & Newton. It's a professional colour travel set. In my mind, Rennie Mackintosh would have taken out a portable watercolour set. Winsor & Newton was some of the first to create these, what they call paint cakes, these pans of pigment. So it would have been a version of this that Rennie Mackintosh would have taken out with him. This one's great. It has a little water bottle, a travel brush, a water pot, and palettes, and 14 half pans of pigment there, many of which are cool colours. In here we have Payne's Grey, French Ultramarine, Windsor Blue, Ivory Black. It's £92.55 from Pegasus Art. And equally here we have a beautiful set of brushes, lovely watercolour brushes. These are a quill brush shaped, oval shaped brush and a slanted edge brush, size 10, 12 and 2, £55.10 for that beautiful box set of brushes. We know that Rennie Mackintosh would have had very high quality art materials. So the small number of watercolours that he produced are absolutely sublime, and only total 30. Rennie Mackintosh was a slow painter, coming to it later in his life from the age of 55. He approached them with a meticulousness that he must have applied to his architectural drawings. His palette is cool and moody and not reflective of the hot landscapes that he was painting. In his own words, he had an insane aptitude for seeing green and putting it down here, there and everywhere. Surprisingly, Rennie Mackintosh only sold 2 Catalonian watercolours in his lifetime, and 100 years on, Rennie Mackintosh's watercolours, which he could hardly give away in his lifetime, these days command 6 figures. His ashes were scattered in couloir by Margaret. So I hope you've enjoyed this little brief look at Charles Rennie Mackintosh. I hope it inspires you to dig a bit deeper and go and look at his the buildings that he designed, his furniture and his interiors, and indeed to look a bit longer at his beautiful watercolours, which I am a huge admirer of as a watercolourist myself. A much more abstract and a less meticulous painter. It's something that I greatly aspire to. Thank you.